The record books nearly buried her. Not because she lacked courage, not because her work produced no fruit, and not because she abandoned the faith. Frida Vingren was pushed toward the shadows because her calling placed her where many believed a woman should never stand, behind a pulpit, before an open Bible speaking with spiritual authority. She crossed the Atlantic from Sweden to Brazil in 1917 carrying more than missionary enthusiasm. She had studied the scriptures, trained as a nurse, and prepared herself to serve among the sick, the forgotten, and the spiritually hungry. In Brazil, she became a preacher, writer, editor, translator, musician, and composer of hymns. Yet the deeper her influence became, the greater the resistance surrounding her. This is not simply the story of a missionary. It is the story of what happens when obedience to God begins to cost more than anyone warned you it would. Frida preached when her husband's health weakened. She led gatherings, organized workers, served vulnerable communities, wrote articles, and helped shape the language of a growing Pentecostal movement. While congregations expanded and testimonies multiplied, a quieter conflict was forming behind the scenes. Some leaders could accept her labor, but not her authority. They welcomed her sacrifice, yet questioned her voice. And that contradiction would follow her to the edge of devastation. She endured tropical disease, financial hardship, exhaustion, the death of a child, the declining health of her husband, and fierce opposition from within the religious world she had served. Eventually, the movement that benefited from her gifts restricted the very ministry she believed God had entrusted to her. Her name faded while the institution continued growing. But here is the disturbing question. What do you do when persecution does not come from unbelievers, governments, or enemies of the gospel, but from people who pray beside you? What happens when the doors close inside the house of faith? Frida's life forces us to confront a truth many sermons avoid. The calling of God does not guarantee human recognition. Sometimes obedience leads through applause. Sometimes it leads through abandonment. And sometimes the person carrying the flame is wounded by those who gather around its light. Yet the price of her calling was greater than public rejection. After returning to Sweden, Frida faced widowhood, isolation, physical collapse, and years marked by institutional silence. She died at only 49. For decades, much of her contribution remained outside the center of the official story, even though later scholarship and Pentecostal history began recovering the magnitude of her work. So this investigation is not about creating a flawless heroine. It is about uncovering a silenced witness, a woman who crossed an ocean to answer God, helped strengthen a movement, confronted the boundaries placed upon her ministry, and discovered that the altar can demand everything, even your reputation, your belonging, and your place in history. Frida Vingren paid the price of the calling. But who demanded that price? God, or people speaking in his name? Brazil did not receive Frida Vingren with comfort. It received her with heat, disease, unfamiliar streets, spiritual hunger, and a mission larger than anything she could have carried alone. When she arrived in Belém in 1917, she was 26 years old. She had left Sweden, crossed the Atlantic, and entered a country whose language, customs, and dangers were still foreign to her. Soon afterward, she married Gunnar Vingren. But calling her merely the missionary's wife would conceal the truth. Frida had been trained as a nurse. She entered homes where sickness had already taken possession of the room. She cared for the weak, visited the forgotten, taught the scriptures, translated Christian material, composed hymns, played instruments, wrote articles, and helped communicate the message of a rapidly expanding Pentecostal movement. Her ministry did not remain behind closed doors. When Gunnar's health failed, Frida preached. When communities needed instruction, she taught. When the movement required written material, she placed her convictions on paper. Her voice traveled through sermons, songs, Bible lessons, and publications. But visibility has a price. The more Frida served, the harder it became for some leaders to ignore the question her life was placing before them. Could a woman be called by God to proclaim the gospel publicly? This was not an abstract theological debate for her. It concerned the work she was already doing, the people already hearing the gospel. and the gifts that had already produced visible fruit. Before we enter the conflict that would change her life, subscribe to this channel and activate the notifications. Here, we investigate the stories that religious history often compresses, softens, or leaves outside the official account. And write in the comments, "The calling belongs to God." Your interaction helps this story reach people who may never have heard Frida's name, even though her words and hymns help shape generations of believers. Now consider the contradiction. Frida's labor was useful when there were sick people to visit, texts to translate, children to teach, hymns to compose, and congregations to support. But when that same woman stepped forward to preach, her usefulness suddenly became controversy. They could receive the work of her hands, but could they receive the authority of her voice? The tension followed the movement as it expanded from northern Brazil toward Rio de Janeiro. Frida continued writing and defending women who believed they had also been called to evangelize. She did not frame the issue as a struggle for personal recognition. She argued from Scripture, pointing to women who prayed, prophesied, served, and carried the message of Christ. Then came the year 1930. Leaders gathered to discuss the direction of the growing denomination, and the subject of women in ministry could no longer be avoided. Behind those doors, decisions were made that would reach far beyond a single meeting. They would define who could speak, who must remain silent, and how much Frida would be required to lose for refusing to bury her calling. Frida Vingren's story does not end with a conference, a restriction, or the silence of religious leaders. It ends with a question that still confronts the church today. What happens when an institution benefits from a person's sacrifice but refuses to recognize the calling behind it? Frida paid a devastating price. She gave her health, her strength, her voice, and years of her life to the mission. She crossed an ocean, entered homes marked by sickness, preached when others could not, wrote when the movement needed instruction, and composed words that would continue singing long after her name was pushed into the background. Human recognition failed her, but history did not erase her completely. The truth returned. Her life reminds us that a genuine calling is not measured by titles, platforms, or institutional approval. It is measured by obedience, and obedience is often most visible when applause disappears. Perhaps that is the final lesson Frida left behind. The servant of God may be forgotten by people, but no act of faithfulness is hidden from heaven. If this story has challenged you, subscribe to the channel and activate the notifications. We will continue uncovering the lives, conflicts, and forgotten testimonies that shaped Christian history from behind the official narrative. Write in the comments, "God sees the hidden sacrifice." Your comment and your share can help restore this story to people who have never heard Frida Vingren's name. And before you leave, click the link in the first pinned comment. There you will find a resource created for those who want to deepen their prayer life and recover spiritual practices that many believers have forgotten. Examine it carefully and consider how it may help you build greater discipline, reverence, and consistency before God. Frida Vingren entered history carrying a calling. She left it carrying scars. But the flame she protected did not die. It was passed forward.